On today's show, I asked Stephen Silas about why it feels like Alperen Sengun has been singled out because of his defense, and Silas gave a very insightful, very thorough answer about the situation. He claimed it's not a punishment for Sengun. We're going to unpack all of what he had to say, plus takeaways from the Rockets-Nuggets game coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I want your thoughts on the Alperen Sengun situation, but I want you to wait and hear what Stephen Silas had to say first. Now, as always, thank you so much for listening and making LOR part of your day every single day, whether it's on the way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, sort of weekly co-host. We're glad to have him back on the program finally. It took me a little while to track him down. I had to go through like Craigslist misconnections to find this guy, Alykhan Bijani, the X's and O's man himself. You can track him down on Twitter at Rockets_insider. And I'm going to let Alykhan get a word in here edgewise in a second, but we're going to do today's episode a little bit differently than we normally do for a recap episode. We're going to talk about the Rockets-Nuggets game and some of our takeaways a little bit later on in the episode, but what we're going to focus on here first is kind of this discourse and the dialogue surrounding Alperen Sengun and the fact that these past two Rockets games, he was benched late in the game. We had that really controversial quote coming out from Stephen Silas after Sunday's loss against the Blazers. I got the chance pregame before the Nuggets game to ask Silas for his thoughts on Alperen Sengun and his defense and just kind of the whole situation. Silas gave a very long, detailed answer that we're going to run back here in just a second. And then I want you to hold on through that answer because Alykhan and I have a lot of thoughts that we want to share about that. But Alykhan, really quickly, before we dive into that question and answer subsequently, I'm happy to have you back on the program, man.
Happy to see you again, Jackson. It's been a minute.
It's been too long, brother. It's been too long.
I'm ready to vent, man. I'm ready to vent. It's time.
Oh man, we're gonna get unhinged Alykhan Unleash here on the podcast. We're gonna do that in just a second. We're gonna run back this quote, my question, and Stephen Silas's answer for it runs about 3 minutes long. We're running that back, and then we've got a lot of thoughts about that. So sit tight.
Coach, over these last couple of games, why does it appear that Alperen Sengun is especially singled out defensively when the whole team kind of struggled to contain Clay and then Dame? And what needs to happen for him on the defensive side to have that not be the case?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things with that. There's the 5-man, where with other guys you can move them around a little bit. You can change the matchups with them. But with the 5-man, there's just the coverage, right? And Alperen, in particular, doesn't have the ability I can't change coverages very much with him, right? Like, he can't switch. And his blitzing is something that will come, but it's not there yet. So when there's a Clay or a Dame and a change needs to be made, then I need to go to a switching group. I need to go to a blitzing group where I can put more pressure on the guy or guys or offense. And yeah, it's a learning process for him. We had to put him on Tybal early in the game of the last game so he wouldn't be in as many pick and rolls. And he's not being singled out at all, but it is the job of the 5-man to be the one who can kind of man your defense and be the center point of your defense. So yeah, we've had conversations about it. It's not like he's being punished at all, but when there's a Klay Thompson or a Dame Lillard going, you have to make an adjustment, and to leave him out there on an island where he's either going to be in a deep drop or a drop that's a little bit higher, and that's really about it. And it's unfair to him, it's unfair to the group, it's unfair to everybody to just allow him to get dribbled around or shot. Obviously Dame was making shots on everybody, but it is my job to exhaust every option, whether it's zone with Bobby, whether it's switching with Jabari, whether it's blitzing with Us. You know, we're a young group, and I had this conversation with him yesterday about Jokic and his pick and roll defense. And his pick and roll defense has gotten a lot better as his career has gone along. But Alpie's 20. He's a second-year player. You know, I don't understand I do understand it, but I don't want him to put so much pressure on himself if there's an adjustment made and it's one game out of 82 or 2 games out of 82. He'll get a lot better. But he's 20 years old. He's a second-year player. He'll be fine.
Okay. Hopefully you're still with us. It was a very, very long answer from Stephen Silas, but a very insightful answer, honestly. And I think it cleared up a lot of the question marks around what is currently going on with the Rockets, with Alperen Sengun. Alykhan and I are each going to share a major takeaway from what Stephen Silas had to share, and then we're also going to kind of pick it apart even further and really break down some of the defensive components and what he and I are both seeing happen on the court for the Houston Rockets and kind of more of what we think about this. But Alykhan, really quick, what's your biggest takeaway from what Stephen Silas just shared in that answer about Alperen Sengun's defense?
I may not have the quote exactly right, but the part where he was saying when there's like a Damian Lillard or Klay Thompson, like a player getting going, you have to make an adjustment. So leaving Alpie out on an island, well, he'll be in deep drop or a drop that's a little bit higher. That's about it. It's unfair to him and unfair to the group. I think that's really interesting what he said, not just unfair to Alpie, unfair to the group as well. Because when he is in deep drop or he's in drop, or in this case, hidden on thigh ball, you know, that limits you when Shengun is involved in the pick and roll action versus when he's off. Silas feel like there is more flexibility to be able to do a lot of different things. So that from that perspective was very interesting for me to hear from him.
I liked, for me, and kind of piggybacking off your point there, is I honestly, one of my biggest takeaway, and we're going to get into further takeaways about this and what it means in the grand scheme of things moving forward for Alpie, for the Rockets, for Silas, but I honestly really appreciated and respected the honesty with which he kind of shared his thought process, right, as to how he's approaching this situation. I may not agree in full with his answer, and you will hear more of why I disagree with some of the points that he actually made in his answer, but you could tell he was being completely honest, right, where he was like, hey, I really can only use Alpie in these 2 ways, right? A drop scheme where he's a deep drop or he plays a little bit higher, and that's it, right? Silas currently, at this juncture, does not feel comfortable using Alpie in a blitzing scheme or using Alpie as a switch defender and putting him out on the perimeter on another guy. The only way he feels comfortable with him is in those 2 regards. And he highlighted that, right, and went at length to explain why that's his reasoning. And that may or may not be the right reasoning, but at least it's a transparent, honest answer. And in that regard, I completely respect what he said. Now, coming up here in just a second, we're going to unpack this answer a little bit further. I've got some pushback on some of the parts that Stephen Silas decided to, kind of share with us, and we're going to get there in just one moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We've made it past the All-Star break, and we're on the final stretch of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to different point scorers, season awards, Sixth Man of the Year, MVP. You can bet on finals odds. You can bet on who are going to be the 2 teams in the NBA Finals this season. Right now, the leading favorites, Boston Celtics versus Phoenix Suns at plus 600. Right after that, you got Boston Celtics versus Denver Nuggets at plus 750. Milwaukee Bucks versus Phoenix Suns at plus 800. And then rounding out the top 4 spots, you got Milwaukee Bucks versus Denver Nuggets at plus 1,000. So for all those odds and more, be sure to go visit FanDuel. FanDuel also lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, we're going to continue to discuss kind of these major takeaways regarding Alperen Sengun here in just a second, because I've got some pushback about Stephen Silas' answer. But first, Alykhan, I have to ask, since this is your first episode back in a little while, have you done your ritualistic duties for today in praying for Victor Wembanyama?
Pray for Victor. Inshallah.
There we go. Oh man, I need to re-add that soundbite to the board. But yes, we have to pray for Victor here every single day at Locked On Rockets, up until and including probably the draft lottery. But let's keep things focused here on the big story, and that is, again, the usage of Alperen Sengun and how Stephen Silas thinks he can or can't use him defensively. What part of Silas's answer, right, is, was saying he doesn't want Shengun to feel punished. And I do think there is a level of, getting benched is inherently a punishment. I think it is.
He mentioned two things, Jackson, also without the punishment thing. He said he's 20 years old, second-year player. He mentioned that twice in the second half of his answer.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how he was trying to soften what he was trying to say with those things. 20 years old, second-year player, and other Jokic stuff as well. But it's very interesting that he kind of said that, right? The placement of it to kind of make sure that people knew that what he was saying came from a place.
Yeah, and he was trying to, kind of trying to hammer home and emphasize those points for sure by delivering it a couple different times. Just, the idea that it's not a punishment, I think it's really hard, right? And I think maybe you're seeing some of that, mentally kind of wearing on Alpie a little bit. Like the other day, Alpie did a post-game interview. He was like, I think that's the reason that I'm not, playing at the end of these games. That's gotta be really tough for a young player to feel singled out in that way, because the issue here is that I can make the argument and make the case that Jabari has had a number of defensive lapses, that Jalen has consistent defensive lapses, that Kevin has consistent defensive lapses. But this ties back into an earlier point that Silas made, which is that he believes that the five on the floor needs to be your defensive point, right? Needs to be the guy responsible for stopping things. It needs to be kind of, he didn't use the word anchor, right? But that is the five man's responsibility is what he said.
Call it the center point.
The center point.
Yeah.
There you go. The center point. So in that regard, that's just, it's further context, and it's a deeper look into Stephen Silas's mind as to how he views the game of basketball and what he thinks that position needs to bring to the table. Now, where elsewhere in his answer, right, he talked about, switching things up defensively and, trying, zone with Boban or blitzing with Us or switching with Jabari. My issue, and again, maybe it's because they've exhausted these kind of things in practice, and he's gotten a good enough look at, Shengun blitzing or switching or playing zone in practice where he's like, it's not worth it even trying it in a game. But my biggest issue is we just don't ever see it, right?
Yeah.
And here's one for you. In the game against the Nuggets, we saw a possession. What am I saying? We saw a possession where Alperen Sengun did blitz the ball handler. They blitzed Jamal Murray, I think it was, and it was a successful defensive possession. They forced a miss. They forced the ball out of Murray's hands, and then they forced a miss, and the Rockets actually came down on the other end and got a breakaway dunk out of that possession. And then a couple possessions later, they did the exact same thing with Usman Garuba, who blitzed the ball handler, and they forced a turnover, and they got another bucket out of it. So my frustration stem from the fact that I feel like so much of this season, the Rockets have spent doing the same exact thing and expecting different results, right? Putting Shengun in a deep drop or playing him, more at the level of the screen, whatever, and expecting different results, right? And I get it. He's only comfortable. He feels like Shengun can only be utilized in this one way, or these two ways, I guess. But what is there to lose from experimenting, right? What is there to lose from trying different things? And maybe you do tap into something. Maybe there's a level of, if Shengun's blitzing in a game, it just looks different than when he's blitzing in practice. So that's my thing, is we just haven't ever seen it. And I just wish that we could at least see it before we dismiss it.
Yeah, I'm going to take more of a positive or optimistic look at this.
Sure, make me the negative Nancy.
No, I think it's not supporting or whatever. I just think it's interesting how he mentioned, Stephen Silas mentioned that Jokic pick and roll defenses have gotten a lot better, right, from where he started, from where he is now. And I really do think that really helped Alpie today. I'm not going to say Alpie had the best game overall, not just offensively, but defensively. But I saw Alpie try to do a little bit more, put a little bit more effort, especially when he was higher along the perimeter. And when he did those blitzes, there was actually another time when he blitzed a ball handler. And what happened on that possession that wasn't successful was that when he blitzed, let me kind of diagram what happens in a blitz. You're blitzing the ball handler. That means there's 3 defenders behind you playing 4-on-3, right, with the offense. In that case, you have to make sure that you're playing the gaps and you're accounting for where every single shooter is on the floor. There was one player on the weak side by the dunker spot who's not only responsible for that part of the lane, but also the corner 3-point shooter in that case. And they were hesitant to be able to step over. I think it was Jabbar. I don't want to mistakenly say so. But that player was hesitant to be able to step up. Otherwise, I think that blitz would have worked well there. So I think we saw moments of it. Blitzing is not just about Alpie going out there and waving his hands and keeping them back to not draw fouls or to at least mitigate the pass, but to also the rest of his team to play alongside him. And I think that's kind of what Stephen Silas was saying when he was saying about the whole singling out. I'll give you another example. When the Rockets started him on Matisse Thybulle, the purpose of that was not just to, let's put Shengun there so he's not involved in pick and roll coverages. It was also to allow the other 4 Rockets to be able to do different things defensively. And what I mean by that is they weren't actually switching every single action. There were actions where a guy went under the screen or the guy was overplaying the dribble handoff or the flare actions that Portland likes to run to open up threes. It was to provide some more flexibility and variation with their defensive coverage without having to, ideally have Alpie involved in the coverage and put the defense in rotation. I don't necessarily think, and I think it's unfair to single out Alpie as being the sole problem with the defense, because honestly, Jackson, frankly, I've said this many times, the biggest issue with this Rockets defense is not just the point of attack defense, which kind of causes Alpie to put in the situation, is that where's the help, right? It's like when Alpie is having to decide between picking up the roll man and picking up the big, and let's say a help guy comes over from the corner, and the guy who's supposed to now rotate over to take on the shooter, he needs to be ready. And then the other defender has to be ready to close out again. The multiple closeouts, multiple efforts, multiple rotations, that does not happen. We see the primary, read, right? Where it's like, let me go over the screen, Alpie's there. But where's the secondary rotation? Where's the tertiary rotation? That to me is the big problem here. But I see the perspective of what Stephen Silas is trying to do in the situation is limit the amount of times his team has to get into rotation if Shengun is not consistently in drop or drop coverage. But then that kind of also gets back to, and the point can be made, Jackson, what you're saying, why don't you blitz? Why don't you show, right? You don't have to just blitz and trap. You can just show, have Alpie come out high, have the ball handler's defender come back over and get back into position, and then Alpie can keep his arms up in the air and kind of get back to his the roll man as his defensive assignment. It's not that hard to do. I think more than anything, not just trying to diversifying and trying those things, is to get it on film. Yes, Stephen Silas said that he's not ready. Alpie is blitzing will come, but it's not ready yet, and switching is a no for him right now. But you can't showcase to Alpie in real game film what's going on if you're not doing it in the game. I get practice, I get the importance of practice, and maybe they're not seeing that translate right on the practice court. But I still think you got to get it on game film and try it out to not only see how Alpie does in that role, but to see then how his teammates who struggle rotations kind of dissect that and if they can make the proper read moving forward.
Absolutely. No. And again, so much of what this season could have been about would have been like experimentation, right? And I just feel like we have seen a distinct, and this is not just from the defensive side of things, this is just across the board, right? It feels like this team has, is in a box of like, they want to play a very certain way, a specific style. They're comfortable doing certain things. And it feels like at no point have they just like, I would be so content if Stephen Silas were to just take stuff and just start throwing it at the wall to see if something would stick, to see if he could find success doing something, anything random. And yet there's a lot of like going with the safe option or sticking with what's easy or trying to keep things simple. And we were told last year at the end in their exit interviews, okay, the principles, the groundwork has been laid. Next year, we're going to do more complicated stuff. We're going to start evolving some of these principles and building upon the foundation that we built this season. I feel like the foundation is still being built. Or I feel like maybe the foundation is starting to rot from underneath and like they've like caved in on itself because they haven't added any more complexities to what they're doing. I feel like it's just more or less same old, and you do same old with very little to no experimentation on top of it. And it feels stagnant, stale, like there's nothing new being attempted or whatever. And this is the season to try and do it, right? You're developing these guys.
The second half of the season, right, Jackson, where you're going into a situation where you have 3 weeks of the season left. And I get, like I said, I'm also going to bring the other perspective here. I get why they're trying to establish a baseline. I get the base and core principles they're trying to implement. You had 4 rookies last year who are now second-year players. You have 3 rookies who are in their first year. All of them are in the rotation currently. They're still learning NBA defenses. But at some point, you should expect these players, even if they're teenagers, even if they're one and done. I made this point on my last appearance that sometimes can play and be an inhibitor for them because they haven't had that much playing time in collegiate level and now professionally. It can be an inhibitor. But that being said, you're looking for some sort of, consistency from your baseline. If you're going to play drop coverage, or in this case, high drop if Alpie's out towards the perimeter, you're expecting to see that low man, who's usually the low man in these situations, rotate over or know how to make a read. You're expecting that point of attack defender to be able to understand these are the types of screens I'm going to get. If a big is coming to set a screen for me at this angle, I should angle my body or contort my body in this way. There are things you learn in terms of technique. And for me, I just have not seen that consistency yet for me to be able to say that this is good or this is bad. I would like to see more experimentation so you get as much data as you possibly can. But that's just my gripe, right? I want to be able to see consistency.
Well, it's my gripe too. It's okay. You're not alone.
Yeah. I have one more point, Jackson. Do we have enough time in this segment for me to make it?
You know what? I'll tell you what. Let's bottle the point for a second. We will get to it in just a moment. Coming up, we're going to talk about the takeaways from the actual Nuggets game itself, some of what we did see. I know we've mentioned little tidbits here and there about kind of as it relates back to Alperen Sengun, the defensive principles and stuff of this Houston Rockets team. We're going to share some other takeaways from this game. One person that we are absolutely going to talk about, Usman Garuba, who continues to make the most out of his minutes on the Houston Rockets court. We're going to talk about that and more coming up here in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Alykhan, you had a point that you wanted to make at the end of last segment, and I'm so sorry for forcing you to bottle that up, but you can unleash now. We can go back to unhinged, unleashed Alykhan. Go for it.
I just want to be able to provide our listeners with some more context about how the media, asks questions, how it operates a little behind the scenes. So, obviously, Shengun, the whole thing, he didn't play in the fourth quarter happened in Golden State, right? And that was the first time. Then they play in Portland, happens again. And there was this big thing on Twitter about why aren't the media asking questions? What's going on? Rockets fans, one thing I want to share with you is that on the road, sometimes there are road trips where maybe 1 or 2 or 3 people maximum are traveling with the team. And especially on a road trip that's far West Coast, I think I don't want to misspeak or I don't want to say incorrectly about the Golden State game, but in the Portland game, there was Vanessa Richardson with AT&T Sportsnet, and there was Danielle Lerner with the Houston Chronicle. By the way, Danielle, I don't think she gets enough props. She's been doing a great job.
She does fantastic work. Go follow Danielle and make sure you read her work. She does great work.
And so there was only 2 people there, 2 perspectives, right, and asking questions. Versus when you're at home, Jackson was at the home game today. when they played against the Nuggets. You have different perspectives, right? You have multiple perspectives, multiple media members who are present asking different types of questions. So then that allowed Jackson to ask this question that we heard in the first segment. Kelly Iko from The Athletic asked a question about why you always talk about film. Why is it not translating from film onto the court? These tough questions that fans want. I think there is a legitimate, I'm hearing you out. I understand. This is the frustration. You want to be able to hear people be held accountable for these things. But I think in the context of what happened this weekend, especially with the Alpie thing, I think the context and understanding, sometimes there's a few things. Number one, if it's on the road, like I said, at home, you get a lot more perspectives. You're able to ask, more people are able to ask questions like Jackson is able to hear, go from there. Also, the media availabilities are not readily available online, right? And so sometimes it's hard for you to be able to see the full context of a conversation versus just an immediate small quote that may come out there on Twitter during a post-game interview, right? I think if those media post-game availabilities were more readily available, or if more people had access to watch AT&T Sportsnet's post-game show where they kind of showcase Silas and other players' post-games, you'd be able to see the full conversation and hear those questions that are being asked. Sometimes it's just because we don't post the clips on Twitter because we're not there, doesn't mean those questions are not being asked. I just want to be able to provide that context. In this case, especially in that Portland game, there were only 2 Rockets media members present, right? And they did their best to ask those questions. Now back home, you have shoot around. Now you have today. Jackson was there pregame. When you have a chance to be able to ask a variety of different questions, usually pregame is for that. Jackson did a good job of asking that question. So I just want to be able to provide that context. I think context is important because our listeners, Jackson, may not necessarily know how the media landscape works and the day-to-day happenings of the logistics behind how to ask questions and things like that.
No, and I think that's a very relevant point to bring up, given so much of the kind of the frustration in what feels like the Rockets fandom and landscape over these last 48 to 72 hours or so regarding the Alperen Sengun situation or whatever. And again, it feels weird because I don't want to say there's an art to asking some of these questions, but there kind of is, right? There's a level of professionality and trying to figure out the right way to approach this because you don't want to come off combative. You don't want to come off and you don't want to go with like a leading question.
Jackson, they'll stop you. The media, the Rockets have a media relations team. If you come out, right, and you have the ability to ask a question and you're saying, hey, Stephen Silas, I think the way you coach rotations is terrible. Why are you doing this? I think you should be fired. They're going to stop the interview right there and just probably, move on to the next question or frankly, like just end the conversation right there. You can ask the question respectfully and be straight to the point without having to be disrespectful and combative. I think what Jackson did, and you heard that was a great way of framing the question for Stephen to be able to answer and understanding from an on-court perspective, why does it feel like Shengun was being singled out and kind of where you go from there. I think that was a great way to frame it versus saying, hey, why is Shengun not getting playing time? What's going on there, man? Like you have to make sure that you frame the question properly. I think that's also a very important point to make. Because if you don't, and if it's a question that's very disrespectful, obviously disrespectful, they will stop it and you won't be able to finish that question. And frankly, it's more of just a courtesy thing. If you do that, you probably won't be invited back to come to a game as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And again, a bit of a peek behind the curtain from our seasoned media veteran, Alykhan Bijani. And then I'm still, kind of learning the ropes a little bit. I've only been around. This is only my second season being, credentialed in a full capacity, but I'm still a little fresh. But I'm learning the ropes here. Yeah, I think that this was honestly one of the more insightful points of the season. Just a real, because I don't want to say it's rare, but there are a lot of times that in these media scrums, in these availabilities, you're going to get a lot of kind of canned answers, maybe some, just generic type answers. But when you do, and this is one thing that I do genuinely appreciate about Stephen Silas as a basketball mind, is if you take the time and the care to ask him a legitimate question, more often than not, I feel like he respects that and gives you a legitimate answer, a transparent, good answer.
I mean, Jackson, you remember when I used to attend games for 2 seasons and I would ask him X's and O's questions, he would take the time to answer those X and O's questions, I think it was pretty insightful too. So I think you did a great job of being direct with him, asking him that question, and he took the time to give you a 3-minute answer about that. And then speaking of Jackson, we did have a game that was played.
I was like, we needed this. This pod is not about gassing me up. We're gonna stop this right now. I'm deading this conversation. But yes, we did have a game that was played, and in that game, we have a couple different players that we want to talk about. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? Because there are a couple takeaways that I have from this Nuggets game, despite the fact that the Rockets took another L. Yes, it's the Nuggets. They're the best team in the Western Conference. They have the going to be 3-time MVP in Nikola Jokic. There was very little chance that the Rockets were going to be able to win this game. A loss was wholly expected. But I do think there were some silver linings and some positives from this one. Me or you first?
Go first, because you also have the Garuba stuff you asked us afterwards. I'd like you to share with the audience.
Well, the Garuba stuff is what I wanted to talk about, man. Like, it's just when Garuba steps on the floor, one, his hustle and his energy is infectious, and I feel like his teammates kind of feed off of that, to where there is a very legitimate, like, I don't know, effect that like the Goon Squad has when they're on the court together, right? We haven't seen it, as much as of late, because KJ Martin has basically become a full-time starter in the absence of Kevin Porter Jr. But earlier this season, when they had that three-man lineup that would check in, KJ, Tari, and Us all together, that three-man group was able to like just wreak havoc on the game and make things happen because they're so scrappy and energetic and chaotic, both for good and for bad on the court at times. And we saw that in effect in this game because the way that Stephen Silas staggered some of his rotations, we saw some minutes where KJ and Tari and Us were out there united once again. Goon Squad, brought back together under one umbrella. And Garuba himself, again, his motor never stops. He's out there hustling, making the most of every second that he is on the court. And there was one possession that really, really stood out to me where the Rockets were bringing the ball up. And there were a few possessions where like Denver would randomly throw out some full court press, some pressure as the Rockets were bringing the ball up. And there were a couple times in the first half where the Rockets were bringing the ball up and they turned it over. And, because the Nuggets were actually applying like random pressure at times, just, full court pressing just to mess with the Rockets. And there was one possession at one point where ball's being brought up, the Rockets are starting their like half court set, their action, and turnover happens. And it could have just been one of those, turnover, okay, it's getting, all right, 2 points the other way for the Nuggets. Ball got knocked into the backcourt, though. Usman Garuba took off and was racing against another Nuggets player to try and get to that ball. Wound up getting there just in time to crash on the floor and fight and scrap for the loose ball. He wound up not actually recovering the loose ball, but he killed just enough time for the other Rockets to then get back and actually stop the Nuggets from scoring on that possession. So even though he didn't get back and like actually recover the loose ball, it's those types of moments and plays from Garuba that are so impactful. And I think, again, you have a guy who's willing to like put his body on the line and throw himself on the deck and try and recover a loose ball like that, as well as just all the other stuff that he provides, the rebounding, the defensive intensity, the switchability. It really is disappointing that we don't get to see more of Garuba. And
that should be rewarding.
And I got a chance to ask Silas at the very end of the game. I teed up, I was like, what do you think about Garuba's impact in this game? And then my follow-up to him was just, and we won't worry about this clip, it was just, I followed up, I said, earlier this season, you said that we might see Shengun and Garuba, at some point share the court together this season. Is that still a possibility over these remaining games? And he said it's a possibility. So it wasn't like he didn't confirm it. It didn't sound like a resounding, like, yes, I'm going to do it at some point. But that is something that is on my like short list of things that I hope we can see before the end of the season is Garuba playing alongside Shengun, because I feel like he actually has the perfect skill set to help offset some of what Shengun can't bring to the table defensively.
I think you can actually, how Stephen Silas says you're limited when Shengun is at the 5. I think even with Garuba in the game, you could actually change that, and it can be a lot more flexible. You don't have to just do drop. You can actually add some variability to your defensive coverage. I want to highlight 2 things. First is post-game, KJ Martin talked about how that there are similarities between the Nuggets and the Rockets. You have Alpie, Jokic, and then he mentioned Aaron Gordon as someone who can do a lot of different things, and he didn't have any context for that. Like, he just mentioned that, and I think he may have been talking about himself in that case as somebody who can.
Because he looks at Aaron Gordon, he's like, that guy is kind of like me.
And I just wanted to throw that out to our listeners, is that KJ Martin, Aaron Gordon, very interesting comparison that KJ Martin brought up himself. he also said that, and Alpie kind of hinted at this too in his post-game presser, that the Nuggets have played together for a long period of time, and so they know what each other is going to do. And Alpie's like, I think Alpie said it too, and KJ said it at one point, that they're going to be like that as well. They're still learning how to play, because Jae'Sean and KJ played together 3 years. It's only been 2 years now for KJ and Jalen and Shengun, and then there's only been a season so far for him and Jabari and players like that. That's some additional like thinking material for us to keep in mind, right? As we're watching this team, is the Nuggets, it took some time for them to kind of rally behind each other and learn how each other plays. If you're looking for some positivity, maybe that can be a positive thought for you to keep in mind. The second thing I want to mention is TyTy Washington. He's just really impressed me. I mean, I remember, Jackson, you and I talked about this from Summer League, the draft. You know, back then I was very high on TyTy. I think he is somebody who can mold into a good serviceable player. I have a good comparison to him, I think works well, is Tyus Jones. And the reason why is because a combo guard can hit the floater, is developing a good three-point shot, and can be serviceable for you next to your star player. For example, Tyus Jones is very serviceable next to John Morant and Desmond Bane. In this case, I think TyTy can be very serviceable next to Jalen and potentially Kevin Porter Jr. But why is that important? Because TyTy has experience being a point guard, but having to play an off-ball role like he did in Kentucky. In this case here, you want to see more Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun dribble handoffs, which is their most efficient play for both of them. If that can be the case, and you have TyTy off the ball and as a secondary ball handler valve for the team, that allows him to do some things. And you know, one thing I want to point out about TyTy, you saw that today, you've been seeing that, is he's learning how to find gaps. When you're a young player in the NBA, it's not just about, you know, scoring, it's about learning how to find gaps on the court, because teams have to cover such a wide area of the court. But once you get to the paint, it's easy for young players to be able to do some things, especially for TyTy. He gets to the paint, he has a floater, he can get to a layup, he can make a pass, he can shoot, all these different things, but he has to touch the paint. He struggled initially early in the season when he had minutes doing that, but as of late in this last 8-game stretch, I would say, he's doing a great job of learning how to find those gaps into even the high area of the paint by the free throw line, and just he's able to do so much damage from there. So I'm really eager to see how he continues to develop, and I was very happy in this Nuggets game of seeing how well he played with Jalen Green. I think that's something for us to keep in mind as a positive thing moving forward. How well do those TyTy Washington and Jalen Green minutes fare going into the rest of the season?
Absolutely. I have taken up residency on TyTy Island. I said a couple weeks back, I was like, he looks like a legitimate NBA point guard already. His comfortability, his ball security, the way that he reads the game. The shot hasn't quite translated yet. Unfortunately, his shooting percentages are pretty rough. Even that floater that is so patented, so lethal, you know, he's been missing that on occasion now too. Unfortunately, he's not quite as automatic as it seemingly was in, you know, the first few games early on in his career. But just the fluidity with which he plays, right? The way that he reads the game, all of it. It stands out. I want to give some quick hitters here at the very end of the show. You know, just again, not kind of a non-traditional recap pod, unfortunately, but I do want to, you know, share some thoughts on some of these other guys very, very briefly here. KJ Martin, very solid night, all things considered. Had a number of really impressive just cuts, right, where he gets fed the ball from other guys on the court, whether it's Alpie. He had one from a quick read shovel pass from Jae'Sean that he went up and, you know, yammed it coming baseline. And then he had a fantastic role with Jalen Green in the first quarter, where Jalen, it was a filthy pass from Jalen in real time. I didn't even see how Jalen delivered the pass, but Jalen came out and was diming people up in the first quarter. He had 3 first quarter assists, including a hockey assist that he did not get credit for. Or I guess, you know, he did get credit, but
AJ doesn't have to go anywhere when he's on the roll. He just goes straight north to south. There's no wasted movement with his rolls, which is why I think he's so good in that space.
Absolutely. And again, like, so Jalen hit him with a pass and he elevated and you know, dunked it home, got an and one dunk, you know, on one of the early plays in this game. So very impressed with what KJ continues to do, the production that he continues to provide. We touched on Shengun a little bit, his effort in this game. I thought, you know, for the most part, he had actually kind of a down, like, offensive game. You know, felt like he was trying to do a little bit too much at times. But he was facilitating the ball well. He had 8 assists. He was looking to get his teammates involved. Shengun is still a guy who can impact the game even when he's not scoring the ball because he is willing to share the ball and looking to create opportunities for his teammates. Jae'Sean got the start, and actually Jae'Sean played a pretty good game, all things considered. 14 points, 5 assists. He did have 4 turnovers, but 6 of 10 shooting from the floor. Solid overall game for Jae'Sean.
I don't want Rockets fans to be mean to me here, but Jae'Sean's not been bad these last 2 or 3 games.
I still think that TyTy deserved the start, honestly. But there was a part of me that knew that with Jalen back in the starting lineup, I kind of figured that we might see Jae'Sean thrown back in there.
They like his body. They like his body, especially defensively, to be able to hang with those guards.
Absolutely.
At this point, that's just the answer, guys.
And that's the edge that Jae'Sean has on TyTy is the defense. And it's not to say TyTy's a bad defender. It's just physicality wise and body type wise, Jae'Sean has him beat there. And then off the Rockets bench, Tari Eason. Man, Tari does Tari things every single time he touches the floor. 17 and 12, had 2 assists, had a steal. The steal they had on Michael Porter Jr., MPJ drove the ball, and Tari just said, nope, mine, and took the ball away from him, just like a grown man steal. And MPJ was like, what? Like, MPJ had no idea what happened. Just like, it was like a drive-by by Tari. He just grabs the ball and he's gone. And so
they are the only Rockets players to have played in every single game this season. And as a young player, I think that's an incredible stat because not only has he played, but he's made an impact in every single game. And
say that. So Tari and who? It was Tari and
AJ Martin have played in all Rockets games this season. That in itself is a feat, but the fact that he's not only played but every game, but made an impact in every single game at one point, that's something that you want to see. And I'm really bullish on Tari's future.
True Ironman here. Also, I know I mentioned Jalen Green's passing. This was Jalen Green's first game back. I feel like we completely buried the lead on that, but we've had so much to talk about in this episode. I know we're running long as is, but it was Jalen Green's first game back in the Rockets lineup. He played just 19 minutes. What's up?
That boy nice, man.
He's good, man. He played. It was a strong game, I think, given all things considered. His first game back, 17 points, 5 assists, had a steal, no turnovers. Made some really solid reads. He did miss some shots here and there, but overall, a really encouraging first game back for Jalen Green. Short hair, Jalen Green, mind you. A different look for JG4 in the Rockets rotation now. Hopefully, something to build on moving forward. And then last thing of note. When garbage time hit with 5 minutes left in the game, the Rockets unveiled their Twin Towers lineup of Boban Marjanovic and Frank the Tank Kaminsky, which I thought was hilarious. So just watching those two guys be on the court at the same time is kind of a funny look. But with that, that's going to do it for our show. Alykhan, you know the drill. Tell everybody where they can track you down at.
Follow me on Twitter, Rockets_Insider. Follow me on TikTok as Rockets_Insider. Thanks for having me on, Jackson. It was fun. Got to get some venting off my shoulders.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Give me your thoughts on what Stephen Silas had to say about Alperen Sengun. Give me your thoughts on the state of Rockets media. Give me your thoughts on anything. Just I read the comments every single day. I may not be able to reply to all of them, but I do read them every single day. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.